Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar for our 7th lesson on the laws of Shabbat B'neinei Halacha. On our last lesson we focused on Zachor v'Shamor, remembering and observing the Sabbath, and we are going to expand a little bit on this concept in this lesson. It says again, if we look in the 10 Commandments, the 4th commandment is remembering the Sabbath. But if we look at the 3 previous commandments, we see how the order of the commandments is so precise. The first commandment is, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God. The second commandment, there shall be no other gods besides me. The person's not going to make any images, all that. That's the second law. The third law refers to not swearing in God's name, falsely swearing in God's name. And the 4th law, as we mentioned, is Shabbat. In other words, these 4 first laws of the 10 commandments are all connected into the framework, building a framework of faith in God. And Shabbat, we see, is intrinsically connected to faith. And that's really what the famous Zohar Kadosh, the famous author of our Kabbalistic work, the greatest Kabbalistic work of all time, the Zohar Kadosh, by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. As a matter of fact, we just celebrated on Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of counting the Omer, his yurtzeit, his memorial day. That great teaching of the Zohar, he says in his teachings, that Shabbat contains within it all the fundamental principles of Jewish faith are connected to Sabbath. So we see how the order of things is so precise. As we continue, we see that Shabbat represents two, we learned about it in our previous lesson, 2 important aspects. Number one, it's connected to the creation of the universe. The first time it's mentioned in Exodus refers to in regards to the creation, as we said. And the second time of leaving Egypt. In other words, when God created the world, from then until now, God continues to sustain the world and to keep the world alive. And that's the first principle. And the second principle, He took us out of Egypt. From then, God revealed Himself. And when He took us out of Egypt, it strengthens the whole concept of divine providence in the world, that God rules the world and watches over the world. And He punishes the evil in the world and grants reward to the righteous of the world. And He chose Israel, His chosen nation, that through the people of Israel, God's providence, His divine providence will be revealed to the world. So in other words, we see a combination of creation and understanding the purpose of creation is the revelation of God's presence in the world, which is done, again, through the people of Israel, where God showed His great hand of His providence, that He relates to a nation of the world. He prophesizes that nation. He brings His light into the nation. And that is all connected again to the 2 aspects of Shabbat, Zachor v'Shamor. And rabbis teach us regarding Zachor Yom HaShabbat Lekadsho, that how do we remember the Shabbat? And we spoke about that last lesson. Of course, it's all about faith, etc. But we have a positive commandment to do it in a certain way. It's a ceremony. And how do we do such a thing? And number one, the entire week we're involved in our work week. We spoke about that as well. But we always have to remember Shabbat and prepare for the coming Shabbat. And prepare all the important necessities that we need for making our beautiful Shabbat holy and precious. And if we look in the temple, the Levites in the temple would say a psalm every day for the particular day. Today's, for example, Wednesday, they would say a particular psalm for Wednesday. And before they mention that psalm, they would always say, Hayom Yom. For example, today, Hayom Yom Revi'i b'Shabbat is the 4th day of Shabbat. In other words, they would use as a point of reference the Sabbath, and they would mention the day, before they said the psalm, they would mention that particular day in reference to the Sabbath. And we have that custom to this very day. So every day when we pray in the morning, and it's our Jewish custom to say, today is the 4th day, Yom Revi, of Shabbat. Sin Shabbat, in other words, in reference to Shabbat, it's the 4th day. And this is unique to only the people of Israel, because as we know, the days of the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, they're connected to false gods and deities. These names are independent, they're not connected to Shabbat at all. But the way it's supposed to be really connected is the first day of Sin Shabbat, the second day from Shabbat, the third day from Shabbat. We're always connecting everything from Shabbat, and that shows, again, we are remembering the Sabbath. This is what the Levites did as a practice in the temple, and we continue to do this to this very, very day. If we, as a matter of fact, if we look, or you can find this if you look in a prayer book, you'll see in the prayer book itself, you can see how it's mentioned. If every day you go to your prayer books now, pay attention now. Every day when you do remember, when you're remembering the Shabbat, you will when you read the day of the week, you'll be remembering Shabbat. In other words, we're placing the Shabbat as the essential aspect of our life every single day of the week. Okay. The major way of remembering Shabbat, I mentioned before, our rabbis enacted a special way of remembering Shabbat. So we just spoke about how we make ourselves, preparing ourselves for the Shabbat coming. We're mentioning every day, and the rabbis have a special way when the Shabbat sets in, or when we're bringing in the Shabbat, how do we remember the Shabbat? And the rabbis say to us like this: Ikar mitzvah zechirat Shabbat, the aspect, the ikar, the principle of remembering Shabbat, we do through the kiddush. What is kiddush? Of course, many of you have experienced Shabbat, seen Shabbat, and a traditional Shabbat in a Jewish home, and we all know that we always sanctify the Shabbat through blessing over wine. Wine makes the heart happy, and therefore, when we say kiddush over wine, we are gladdening, we are making ourselves happy and rejoicing in the beautiful day that's coming in. So it's also represents importance, of course, through wine. And therefore, our rabbis, when they said we have to remember the Sabbath, they enacted our custom, our law of doing it through a cup of wine. And in this way, it's, as a matter of fact, reflected in the verse in Isaiah 58, verse number 13. Isaiah says, V'karata l'Shabbat oneg, you shall call the Sabbath enjoyment. And calling we do through saying the Kiddush. So we say special verses, we say special prayer. If you, again, you're looking at your siddurs, your sidurim, your prayer books, you shall see how the words that we use on Shabbat. We bless over, we make the geffen, the blessing over the wine. We talk about, of course, how God rested. By Yechulu we begin. By God rested on the seventh day when He completed creation. And then we go into how the sanctification of Shabbat and what it remembers creation of the universe and leaving Egypt. Those aspects are brought down, all remembered in the Kiddush. All the things we spoke about are reflected in the Kiddush. You can see it in the prayer book when you look at the prayer of reciting the Kiddush. And by doing this, we're basically fulfilling the basic mitzvah of remembering Shabbat. The minute we say Kiddush, Friday night, we're bringing the Sabbath in. We also say it, of course, in the morning after we pray. And by remembering Shabbat, we are doing the basic fulfillment of the mitzvah. But, of course, Shabbat is much more than just reciting the Kiddush and just saying those verses, but we know that the entire Shabbat we have to devote by sanctifying it through our study of Torah, listening to the words of our sages, by going to classes and studying and working on our spiritual soul, spiritual realm, which needs so much nourishment on this special holy day. Okay, hope you enjoyed our 7th lesson, and we shall continue soon with our 8th lesson. Take care, everybody, and we'll be in touch soon again. Bye.